Welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast series. Our show is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest app, which allows innkeepers to provide guests with their recommendations of the best local places to eat, play, and shop during their stay. The Frictionless Guest app is accessible through all mobile and desktop devices, and you can learn more about it by visiting frictionlessguest.com. Once again, that's frictionlessguest.com. I'm Matt Langen, and I'll be joined by Steve Short, the founder and CEO of the Frictionless Guest app. And our guest for this episode is Tom Werman, the owner and operator of Stonover Farm in Lenox, Massachusetts. And Tom is not your typical innkeeper. He's a former record producer who produced 52 albums and an A&R exec who worked with some of the biggest names in rock and roll. Now he hosts guests at his luxurious property less than a mile from Tanglewood in Massachusetts. And Tom and Steve, how you both doing today?
Great. Thank you.
Excellent. Good.
Doing well.
Thanks,
Steve? Matt.
Hey, Steve didn't say he was doing well.
I tried.
He chimed
it's
in
Steve's
late.
birthday.
Yes.
He should be thrilled. It's his birthday.
Yes, the special birthday podcast here. This is one of our very unique ones. So, Tom, tell us about your backstory. This is probably one of the most interesting podcasts that we have done, and Steve and I are both huge rock and roll guys, and we're really excited to speak with you. So tell us a little more about your background in the music business and how you became an innkeeper in Massachusetts.
Well, the music business part, I'll compress. Always loved music. Had 2 bands in college. Got an MBA, unwisely, because my parents wanted me to be, a CEO. I was basically just into music. And I couldn't read or write, but I taught myself how to play the guitar. And I went on my way the way my parents wanted me to, and eventually chose a job out of business school in advertising. And I was miserable. I lasted a year on Madison Avenue. And I was so unhappy that, my wife said, you should leave. You should just play music. You want to play music? Play music. And I left, but not to play music. I wrote to Clive Davis, who was president of CBS Records and probably the biggest guy in the music business at the time, kind of like the Pope. And I got an audience with the Pope after a few months of interviewing. And they hired me to be the assistant to the director of A&R at Epic Records, which was the smaller label to Columbia. And anyway, after 6 years of looking at bands, signing bands, trying to sign bands and being turned down by the label on some huge bands, they let me start signing bands, and I did, and I eventually moved into the studio, and then I had 20 years of making records when people were buying them like hotcakes. So I was very fortunate in the timing and very fortunate in, just having the opportunity to immerse myself in rock and roll for my, most of my young life, actually all of my young life. And a little bit of my old life. And then, of course, all good things come to an end. 1990 came around, and the Seattle sound and grunge and everything kind of wiped out corporate rock, which is what I worked with a lot of hair bands in the 70s and 80s, and that went by the boards. So I was not particularly enthralled with the new music, and I was pretty burned by the time I had done 52 albums. And I was 55 years old, not really primed to make records for teenagers. And my wife and I had stayed at a few B&Bs over the years, and I had always wondered why they were basically all the same. They were charming, they had a lot of fabric, and they had 4-poster beds and some canopies, and a decent, sometimes a breakfast that was provided for you but didn't give you a choice. And I don't want to be, arrogant or rude, but there were no conveniences. It was part of the program. And so I said, my record career is kind of waning and I'm not ready to retire. I need to reinvent myself. I'm living in LA. If I'm not in the record business, I don't have to live in LA. And I was from the Northeast, so there are a few components to this story, but anyway, I had in my mind that I would eventually like to explore the possibility of opening a luxury bed and breakfast, which was all suites, all conveniences. And the internet was just coming of age, and so it was an opportune time to explore something like that. My friend Tom Kelly with whom I was playing a lot of golf because I had a lot of time on my hands because I wasn't working that much in the 90s. He wrote Like a Virgin and a number of other songs, big hit songs. So he could afford to play golf all the time. One day on the golf course, he said, you should read this book, because I was mumbling and grumbling and saying, what am I going to do? And I don't have any good projects, and I have all this time on my hands. So he gave me a book called Who Moved My Cheese? And I read it in 40 minutes and I just immediately, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I said, what am I doing here? Why am I just languishing and letting time go by, and to roll with the changes, as REO Speedwagon once sang.
A band you signed, by the way, right?
Yeah, and whom I signed, yeah. So I honestly, literally got out of my chair, booked a flight to Boston. 2 weeks later, I had seen 7 towns. I saw real estate agents in 7 towns looking desperately for a B&B to renovate and make into my dream, my vision. And Lenox was my last stop, and I drove by this place just by accident, and it just knocked me out. And we did some investigating, and we made an offer, and it was just beyond what I had hoped for. The layout, the appearance, the location. It's just the most wonderful place I could have imagined finding. And literally 4 months after I came east, we were living here. So we did things in a big hurry, and then renovated for 8 months and opened in July 2001. Our first guest was Linda Ronstadt.
Wow.
So that's the backstory.
Wow, that's an incredible story there. And I know we connected about this before, I believe week before last in our Get to Know You pre-call. And I think we talked about how a lot of the bands that you produced were, let's say, very technical, very refined bands, like very, very, their musicality was tremendous, very different than, say, the grunge, right?
Most of my bands were, not that, they were not at the top of the musical heap in terms of technicality, musicianship. Right. A couple were.
I would say Boston probably was, right? That's what I was thinking more. And
well, I signed Boston, but I did not produce Boston. Actually, if I had produced Boston, I wouldn't be working at all. I'd be on a yacht somewhere in the Caribbean.
Right. So I think where I'm going with the question is, it's more that based on your touch, being a producer and putting out quality music, you transition that same desire for a nice quality luxury experience in your B&B at the Stonover Farm. Correct.
Yeah. A lot of people say, well, gee, what does producing records have to do with being an innkeeper? And well, the best way to describe it is to say you've got a lot of pieces that you have to pick up and assemble into a really appealing whole unit, like a record. Bunch of songs, bunch of instruments, players, lyrics, instruments, different parts and arrangements, and make it all into a really appealing musical presentation. Same thing goes with a lodging of any kind. The environment has to be good. It has to be comfortable. The services have to be good. The people who take care of you, have to be attentive and provide you with a really good time. I had specific things in mind, and I had a specific strategy in mind to kind of not let me off the hook, but to allow me to be an innkeeper and run a business without feeling tremendous amounts of pressure. And that has to do with pricing. But we can get into that in a bit. Yes, you're right. The preoccupation with detail is common to both of my careers.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. Steve, I'm going to pass the baton over to you. I'm sure you have additional questions for Tom as well.
Wow, I could ask a million questions, as usual.
I don't know if I have a million answers. I'm not sure.
Probably 2 million. So describe a little bit more. It'd be good to hear a little bit about your reasons for the luxury thing and your feeling that there wasn't a whole lot of that and your kind of unique offering. And part of that, I guess, obviously is the farm, but also everything is everything in outbuildings, or describe what you offer in terms of rooms or suites or whatever, and how that works.
Well, it's small. I wanted it to be small because I don't want a huge staff. I don't want a huge business. In the beginning, we almost did everything ourselves. We had one housekeeper, and the only thing I didn't want to do was, clean toilets, basically. So we avoided that right from the start. We got housekeepers. The main house, we gutted the second floor and rearranged into 3 suites. We have 3 suites in the main house and 2 outbuildings. So we only have 5 accommodations, 5 units. The suites in the main house are sitting room, bed. The schoolhouse, which is an 1850 one-room schoolhouse that we converted, is big. It's our biggest and best suite, and it stands alone by the duck pond, and it's got a huge bathroom. For example, the schoolhouse has heated floors. It's got a living room, a bedroom, and a bathroom, and a patio. It's got heated floors, gas fireplace, jacuzzi tub, 2 sinks. Everything has Wi-Fi, the entire property. It's got remote control air conditioning. It has that furnished patio. It's got a king bed. It has an iPhone docking station streamer. It's got a full cable. It's got 2 big screen high def TVs. It's got a landline for people who have difficulty with their cell service. It's free. It's got about everything that I think any reasonable guest could want. And that's also part of your question about, why I thought about a luxury bed and breakfast. With my experience in B&Bs, we like the people. We liked to be with other people and meet other people. And we liked the fact that, it was somebody's home and not a hotel with duplicate rooms, all the same. But for me, the 4-poster bed, the posts got in the way of the television if you were lucky enough to have a television in your room. A lot of the places we stayed didn't even have a radio. I mean, this was 25, 30 years ago. So when the internet came along, I said, well, if you position yourself between Boston and New York, especially New York, which knows about the Berkshires, you get people who wanted to get out of the city for a few days or a long weekend or a short weekend and get up here in 2.5, 3 hours. And they can either sit by the stream or the pond and commune with nature. They can go on a walk in the woods, or they can stay in bed and check their email or watch a movie. And I also have, when we got here, I started buying DVD movies because there wasn't any streaming really. So we have a huge movie collection and DVD players in all the rooms, so you can watch anything you want. It's a really good collection. I did all the buying. So, that's it. It offers, when we opened, there was really nothing like us. A lot of places are, upgrading now. I think a lot of B&Bs. We've done very, very well. We got 2 awards, and, we have as much business as we want, really, at this point. Does that answer the question pretty much?
Yeah, I think it does. Now, I guess another part of that question. So you're located a couple miles out of town, I believe, and
right, about 3 miles.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from what I understand about Lenox is that it's a very pretty, quaint New England style town, and
right.
There are hotels and B&Bs, inns, whatever, in Lenox, right in the town. So Are you geared more toward the person that does want to just go there and kind of hang out? And, is that what most of your guests do? Are you the draw, or do you have guests that, go, to see music or in the summertime or go to see Lenox, or how?
I see.
What's your mix of guests? Yeah.
Well, July and August is heavily Tanglewood. And in July and August is roughly a third of the year or more. Maybe 40% of the business comes in July and August. Some people want to hang for the rest of the year. They hear about it. We've never advertised. I have a no advertising policy. So people tell other people, and they come here and they're surprised and delighted. So they come back. It is a getaway. People come up and they have no particular plan, or Most people, I would say, who come here have at least kind of a sketchy plan to involve themselves in cultural things, because that's what the Berkshires are all about. The Berkshires, they call themselves, the Chamber of Commerce calls itself America's premier cultural resort. We have the biggest yoga retreat in the country, right around the corner. We have the biggest modern dance center in the country. We have Tanglewood, which is the summer home of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Seats 18,000, 15,000 on the lawn, 3,000 in the shed. We have Mass Museum of Contemporary Art, the Clark Art Museum, the Williams College Art Museum, Williams College itself, Norman Rockwell Museum, Shakespeare and Company, Barrington Stage, Stockbridge Theater Company, Berkshire Theater Company. It just goes on and on. Art schools, drama schools, craft camps. So there's a ton of stuff to do. Or you can ride your bike or go for a walk or swim. So it's a really great alternative to the more difficult tourist attractions in the Northeast, like the Hamptons, pretty expensive, pretty unpleasant to get to. The Cape, which is extremely crowded. The islands, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, which are absurdly expensive, and we're a bargain. And we're 2.5 hours from Boston and 3 hours from New York, roughly. So, there's a lot to come here for. Most people come here they wouldn't come here and say, well, we're just going to, hang around, because there's just too much to see and too much to do. So they wouldn't waste their time. They do relax, though.
Mm-hmm. And so you live in the main house, and the guests are in the outbuildings, right?
They're in the main house. We are attached to the main house, but we live in what used to be the stable, and we converted that to our house.
Oh, cool.
And we attached it by blowing through the kitchen wall to the main house. So I have a 40-foot commute, and I used to do the whole breakfast all the time, set up, cook, clean up. Now, much of the time I have a setup person, and then I come in and cook, and then, like Elvis, I leave the building, and they clean up. So we are extremely close and very accessible, but private. We definitely have our own living situation. I made sure of that. The two outbuildings are about, I would say 150 yards away, 130 yards away. The cottage has 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, porch, and wood-burning fireplace. And you heard about the schoolhouse. And the other 3 suites upstairs are just, 2 queens, 1 king beds. And all the rooms have all the services that I mentioned. Robes, amenities, Wi-Fi. They all have 14-inch mattresses, premium linens, and our breakfast is cooked to order. So you tell me what you're having for breakfast. I don't say, well, today we're having French toast and, cold cereal. I make fresh fruit salad, yogurt, homemade granola, juice, fresh ground coffee, French preserves, butter, cream cheese, bagels, English muffins, locally baked bread, eggs of any kind, French toasts, pancakes, basically whatever you want. And I have a signature omelet called the Tomlet, which is local goat cheese and sautéed mushrooms, very popular. So it's a killer breakfast, and then we have a very nice 5 o'clock afternoon wine and cheese. And that's what people really like, because they get to sit out in the patio or in the living room by the fire in the winter and talk with other guests. And they really get going. There have been some very good matches made here. People have actually done business together after they've met here. They've formed friendships. They see each other in the city. It's good. It's fun and satisfying, kind of not matchmaking, but enabling people to interact with other people in a really nice setting. So it's all good. It's all quite positive. And I've had maybe one intolerable guest in 17 years.
That's a pretty good percentage. So it sounds like you enjoy the cooking thing. Is that right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I have an Aga. Do you know what an Aga stove is?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's
that's a nice stove.
oh, it's fantastic, and it enables me to just crank the dishes out. I mean, I can do scrambled for one with if the pan is hot and ready, I can do it in 30 seconds. It's just a phenomenal stove, and I couldn't do it without that stove. So, yeah, I'm very good in the kitchen after 17 years, kind of like an octopus. I'm I do three or four things at once.
And can you tell, since it's unique, that I think very unique from what we can tell, that you're doing everybody's breakfast to order, you're cooking to order. So, yeah, we've heard various things about big breakfasts not really being preferred anymore. There's no data to confirm that. So since you take every single order and cook whatever they want, what do you see in terms of the trend of breakfast? What are people eating?
Oh, yeah.
Are they eating big breakfast?
No, far less bread, I can tell you that. Far less bread. Everybody, pretty much, most people, 3 out of 4, will have some fruit salad, yogurt, and granola for starters. But then almost everybody has something hot, and they like it. They're on vacation, you know.
Right.
I didn't mention I didn't mention bacon and sausage. You know, I would say that half of the people who have breakfast after they try the tomlet, they'll come down the next day and have a tomlet and bacon. We can also, you know, I also offer onions or spinach or tomatoes or, you know, other things that can go in, or cheddar, or you can have different types of cheese. But I'll recommend something and they'll really like it. Really never struck out with breakfast. And I'm not a chef by any stretch. I just make a really good breakfast.
And are you kind of cooking in the same area as the guests? I mean, what's the interaction in terms of, you talked about the guests themselves hanging out and talking to each other. How much do you interact with the guests?
Very little at breakfast. I am in there toiling. My wife or a high school girl who helps in the busy season will, you know, be the runner and come in, and she'll go in and ask what they'd like, then tell me what they'd like, and I make it, and then she brings it in, and then I start the next order. There aren't, you know, I have at one time made breakfast by myself for 15 people. It's not easy and it's not fun. We usually, you know, a full house for us is 10, and they come down spread out between 8 and 9:45. So it's really not very difficult. And sometimes I'll go in, but I don't have that much time to chit-chat at breakfast. Suki does that. My wife does that a lot. She's very good with talking with guests. I'm the laborer. I just joke that I mow and make omelets. I mow the lawn and I make the omelets. She's really the personality. But I will admit that a lot of people who come here want to sit down and hear Mötley Crüe stories, or, you know, they say, wow, what an interesting career you had. Tell me about, you know. So you do that. It's fun. But in the books, I did read 4 paperbacks before we did this. And I remember specifically one sentence from one of the books that said, remember, your guests do not want to hang out with you. And then it said, be accessible, be available, but give them their space. So I'll sit down with them if they want, but I don't just hang. I have a life, you know, I do other things here. And if they want to talk, we'll talk.
Yeah, it makes sense. You don't want to be overbearing or whatever. And although I still think it's probably, if they know your story, that you're not your average innkeeper that way, in terms of, you'd say, well, you know, I think when people visit an inn or bed and breakfast, it's not about them. It's not about the innkeeper. But in some ways, it's partially about you in some ways. There's got to be a lot of curiosity, and if people know your story,
Yeah, there is, and it's surprising how many people come here and know people that we know or I know, especially people from LA, you know, who are connected to the entertainment business in some way. There are always people in common that we know, so that's, you know, it's fun to do that too, to talk about that.
Anything else about guests or things you do to please your guests in terms of, I mean, you talk about everything being premium quality,
Yeah.
to breakfast and all of that.
Well, yeah. To please the guests, to go back to that strategy I spoke of briefly, I want the guests who come in here to be surprised at every turn and say, wow, isn't this nice? Oh, this is nice. This is a little, from the time they get into the room, they have chocolates waiting for them. And the rooms are, everyone says, oh boy, this is really nice. I mean, the people are very, very complimentary because the place is beautiful. And my wife, has an eye for art and craft. And she has collected a fabulous group of arts and crafts and pictures and pottery and things like that. So they're very happy with that. They're very happy with the rooms. They're very happy with the breakfast. They're very happy with the wine and cheese. And the idea is for me, to be speaking very bluntly, is to give them much more for their money than they expected to get. And by doing that, I free myself to live, to operate by my own standards and not have to, bow and scrape and say, well, if I charge a certain amount, then people are going to expect a lot more. If I charge what I charge now, people say, hey, this is definitely value. So we're going to come back. And that's the only way I would do it, because otherwise there's just too much pressure. There are two places up here, Blantyre and Wheatley, that are very, very high end. And we're talking 800, a night starters. Their service is incredible, and they hover and they'll do everything for you. And we are between them and everyone else. So we have our own little niche. People who come here will pay more than a standard kind of traditional B&B in the village, but it's not at all prohibitively priced. Mm-hmm. That was kind of my own business consideration.
Matt, I probably, I don't know if I did what I was supposed to do or not, but I looks like I've probably hijacked your
No, that's all good, Steve. I think you had some great questions there. No, I think we're pretty good overall. Tom, is there, anything we may have missed? Anything else you'd like to add today?
No, it was a pleasure, and it's always stimulating to actually have to put my own thoughts into words. Come up and see us sometime. It's bliss up here. People ask if you're going to leave, when you're through doing this, are you going to, go somewhere else? This is it. This is the last stop for me. I'll never leave. I don't figure I'll ever leave Lenox. We were so lucky. It's heaven up here. The winters are long, but if you're a visitor, it's fantastic. In the winter.
Sounds incredible.
So no, I have nothing to add except that we are so lucky to have found this kind of deliverance, because I was an unhappy camper at the end of my career in LA, and I was reborn by doing this. So
sounds cool.
Check it out.
I want to ask one more question. Since you've had this different career for the last 20 some years, around 20 years.
Yeah.
Do you miss having a career that involves music or being involved in music? Or it's an interesting question, because you obviously had a love for music, so it's not like you can't follow music or whatever, but you could say, well, you were in the business part of the music, but you were in more artistic, interactive parts of it, Yeah,
I was in the creative part, not the business part. But honestly, I don't miss it. I listen to a lot of music, not new music, admittedly, but a lot of music that I enjoyed from decades past, and some things that I still discover that I missed back then. And no, I don't miss it. I've been to a gazillion clubs, thousands of concerts, spent my life in windowless, smoke-filled rooms, making records indoors. And no, this is the second stage, and it's great, and it's open and healthy. And I love the music, but I don't miss being involved in it at all. People still listen to my music, which is a way, it's amazing how many people are borrowing my songs from the cloud and renting them and then giving them back, which is, I guess, the way people listen to music these days. So the fact that people are still, that kids know about the records that I made and actually listen to them occasionally, that's gratifying to me. It's not like I'm shut out totally, but it was my choice. So no, I don't miss it.
Excellent. Great. Well, that's good. That's a perfect wrap-up question there, Steve. And for all of our listeners, you just heard an exclusive Frictionless Innkeeper podcast interview with Tom Werman, who is the owner and operator of Stonover Farm in Lenox, Mass. And as you heard, Tom is not your typical innkeeper. He's a former record producer who produced 52 albums. He was also an A&R executive who worked with some of the biggest names in rock and roll. And as we discussed, he hosts his luxurious property less than a mile from Tanglewood. And we really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast, brought to you by the Frictionless Guest app. If you wish to learn more, please visit frictionlessguest.com. Once again, that's frictionlessguest.com.